Incoterms. Definition of Incoterms. International commerce terms. Incoterms establishes a set of international rules for the interpretation of trading terms related to sales contracts. Thus, there is no room for different interpretations of the trade terms in different countries. They are used in risky transactions between buyers and sellers in order to reduce possible legal complications. It should be mentioned that Incoterms do not regulate the form of payment by the buyer. Furthermore, they cover only contracts for the sale of goods, excluding service contracts. Aspects incorporated in the Incoterms 2010. In the year 1936, the International Chamber of Commerce published a series of international standards whose purpose was to establish a common understanding of the trade terms. Since then, the ICC has published 8 reviews to improve the interpretation of those terms. The most widely used over the past few years was the one published in 2000. However, the 2010 whole series of changes appeared and it came into focus and into force January 2011, and it's still applicable. One needs to keep in mind that Incoterms are not laws, they are rules. Therefore, new updates do not repeal the previous ones. So it is very important to specify the version being used in each contract. Features of Incoterm 2010. Reduction of 13 to 11 rules. The Incoterm DAF delivered at frontier, DES delivered ex-ship, DQ delivered ex-quality, and DDU delivered duty unpaid are eliminated. DDP delivered duty paid is maintained and focused in the following as created. DAT delivered at terminal. The delivery is made at the destination terminal. DAP delivery at place. Deliveries are made in the destination country in the agreed place and therefore allowing more flexibility. And it places emphasis on increasing the use of electronic documents of any platform, and it recognizes the new transport practices incorporated in the last decade. Here are the characteristics of Incoterm. The 4 points that Incoterms establish are the exact place where the delivery of the goods takes place, the moment in which the goods are put at risk, the distribution of the cost of the operation, the distribution of the documentary procedures. The details that define the 4 points mentioned are listed below. Packing. The seller is responsible for good packing and proper labeling of his merchandise. The load of merchandise. This will be deposited in a truck, container, or warehouse according to the labor risks prevention regulation of the company where it is loaded. The inland transport. This refers to the transport of goods in the country of origin. That is to say, from the factory to the airport, park, cargo terminal, or warehouse of the carrier. Customs export formalities. They refer to the formalities at the customs export office among countries of the European Union. The only thing is needed is filling in a single administrative document, which is rather sad. However, this formality is not necessary in member countries of the customs union. Handling costs. They originate in the delivery of the goods at the terminal of the origin, airport, port, or railway station. They also include expenses associated with handling and loading the goods onto the transport vehicle. Insurance. There are 3 types of insurance. According to the ICC, it is classified as A, B, or C and covers the goods during transport. However, if the company already has global insurance, which includes all risks, it is not necessary to have another one. In case of accident, both companies would pay only the full amount of the loss in percentages. With regard to this insurance, as a rule, it is almost always global insurance, since all 3 types have a series of exceptions that need to be known. Type A insurance covers all risks possible, except willful misconduct of the insured object, leaks, spills, and losses in the volume or weight due to the nature of the thing, loss or damage caused by inadequate packing or inadequacy of the insured objects, inherent defects or intrinsic nature of the thing, and delays, damage from nuclear devices, unseaworthiness or unsuitability of the ship when the insured person is aware of it during the time of loading, war and its manifestations, strike and its manifestations, artifacts of war, and terrorism. Risks excluded in Type B insurance are fire or explosion, sinking, grounding, and stranding of the carrier ship, overturning or derailment of the terrestrial environment, boarding, unloading goods at the port of arrival, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions and lightning, general average sacrifices, throwing and dragging by waves, wetting, rescue costs, and contribution to the general average, total loss of packages in loading or unloading operations. Finally, the Type C excludes fire or explosion, sinking, grounding, or stranding of a carrier ship, overturning or derailment of the Earth's environment, boarding carrier vehicle collisions may occur, unloading goods at the port of arrival, general average sacrifices, and rescue costs and contributions of general average. Handling costs. Those are those associated with the destination terminal and with unloading and handling from the vehicle that carries the merchandise to the main means of transport. Customs import formalities. They are necessary to carry out the procedures for importing the goods. Each country has its own requirements. If the documentation is not properly filled, the products can be stopped at customs. This involves a very high cost for the company. Import documents include the tariff and tax specifications, documents needed to complete the formalities, our origin certificate, inspection certificate, etc. Inland transport. Once the merchandise has reached the destination country, the transport associated with the movement from the port, airport, etc. should be taken into account. Reception and unloading. Finally, the merchandise has been transported to the place of destination. This can be a warehouse, a custom warehouse, factory, etc. It is important to mention that the unloading must always be done by the buyer. Now we have the types of Incoterms. When speaking about the types of Incoterms, we need to consider the following four groups. The Group E, the seller puts goods at the buyer's disposal in his own premises or factory. Group F, the seller is responsible for depositing the goods into a means of transport chosen by the purchaser. C, the seller hires a transport without assuming risk or loss, damage or goods or additional costs after loading and unloading. And D, the seller takes care of all the expenses and risks in order to bring the goods to the destination country. Now let's see in more detail what group implies. Group E, Incoterms. In this case, there is only one possibility. X works. The only requirement for the seller are to leave the goods at a place and date indicated and provide the correct packing. In this way, the seller is exempt from any responsibility for both the loading of the goods and the custom export formalities. The buyer is obliged to choose the means of transport, which can be air, sea, road, or rail. Also, the buyer needs to take responsibility for the costs associated with the transport and complaints. This type of group is recommended for companies that lack adequate infrastructure and personnel for the management of the most advanced logistics operation. It is suitable for making offers of sale at a lower price since the cost associated with the Incoterm is little more than the price of the merchandise. And it is also important to note that it is indeed basically used in the same country, so there is no problems with the customs process. Group Intercoms. Group F Intercoms. In this group, there are three subtypes that can be differentiated. The features that they have are in common. It's the delivery of goods to the boarding point. It is the buyer who bears the cost of transport. It is the buyer who takes on the risk of the main transport. Incoterms that follow part of the group are FCA, a free carrier. The obligations of the seller are to deliver the goods to a carrier chosen by the buyer in the indicated place and carry out the export procedure. The buyer is responsible for choosing the means of transport and the main carrier. He also bears the cost and risk of the loss of damage to the goods from the moment the carrier takes responsibility until the place is unloaded. Of unloading. FAS, free alongside ship, refers to a maritime export. The main obligation of the seller is to deliver the goods to the seaport along with the vessel. It includes the loading of the goods on board. If the goods suffer damage or loss, it is the buyer who is responsible. For his part, the buyer has to choose a shipping company as well as to pay and take on the risks of loss or damage to the goods. Group C, Incoterms. Incoterms that form a part of Group C are in common now the following characteristics. Delivery of goods to the point of destination. It is the seller who chooses and pays for the transport. It is the buyer who bears the risk of the main transport. In the groups, we can distinguish CFR, the cost and freight. In maritime, this in the case is the seller is in charge of hiring a ship as well as managing the export of the goods. Moreover, the purchaser is the person who is financially responsible for the additional costs or risks or loss or damage and taking out insurance covering from the point of destination. CIF, the cost, insurance, and freight, it is characterized by maritime transport. The seller is responsible for hiring the ship, loading, and paying the freight necessary to bring the goods to the port of destination. In addition, and unlike the others, the seller is responsible for taking out an insurance policy for the protection of the goods for a minimum of 110% of the value. While it is the seller who pays the insurance, the goods travel at the buyer's risk, who is the direct beneficiary of the insurance policy. CPT, carriage paid too. In this case, you can use any means of transport, road, rail, air, sea. It is the seller who hires and pays for the transport, as well as the one responsible for exporting the merchandise. And the buyer's obligation is to take care of the risks related to the merchandise from the point where the seller delivers it to the first carrier. CIP, carriage and insurance paid, refers to any of the four modes of transport. The seller hires and pays for the transport used to deliver the goods to an agreed destination, and on the other hand, he's responsible for the export of goods, and in contrast to CPT, takes out a protective insurance policy for a minimum of 110%. In this case, he is only responsible for additional risks associated with the goods. Group D intercoms. Okay, Incoterms terms. The last insurance, the last group characterized by direct delivery on arrival. Their main features is delivery to their destination. Seller designates and pays for the transport. It is the seller who bears the risk of main transport. Incoterms that make up this group are DAT, delivered at terminal. It refers to any mode of transport first. A terminal is designed to place of the destination. The obligations of the seller is to deliver the goods, unload it from the means of transport. He also bears all the risks involved in bringing the goods to the terminal. For his part, the buyer bears any risk of loss or damage, but only when the goods are delivered. DAP, delivery at place. It includes any mode of transport the goods are delivered to a place agreed with the buyer. The seller hires and pays for the transport of the goods to this place. He or she also takes the risks of loss or damage up to the moment of delivery, and the buyer is only responsible for loss or damage once the merchandise has been delivered to the agreed place. DDP, delivered duty paid. It includes any mode of transport. It represents the maximum obligation of the seller since the delivery is carried out in the country of the importer, including unloading. Not only should he or she take the export into account, but also the import formalities. Once again, the buyer only takes responsibility for losses or damages once the merchandise has been delivered. So we have to select the criteria. There are many Incoterms for an international trading operation. Bearing this in mind, it is important to choose well so that as not to take on too many responsibilities or additional costs. So here we have a series of criteria to consider when choosing the Incoterm you should use. Size of the company. Obviously, large companies have more bargaining power with transport operators. It is also influenced by the volume of the material to be transferred, although it is normally associated with the size of the company. Group C, in Incoterms, they are those of greater risk for the buyer, since they transfer the ownership of the goods from the origin. The customer, due to the large number of suppliers and their marketing campaigns, the customer is looking for the seller who facilitates the purchase operation. This means delivering the goods as close as possible to your company or warehouse, etc. Country. In some countries, there might be difficulties when it comes to transport across access or problems of the administrative nature, and in this case, it is recommended using short Incoterms to avoid overcharging. The following table shows a comparison of the advantages and disadvantages of each of the Incoterms in order to help select which is most appropriate. Yeah, you might want to try that one if you're not too far away. And again, these are short operations. All of these full factory loads, this would be a good choice on the dock to the port. And again, short goods loaded, so one needs to bear non-elected transport port charges. Now we can get into some of the long ones. The seller bears the cost of transport, but the risk is on the part of the buyer. When you move on to the next one, bears the cost of insurance, the risk is on the part of the buyer. And now we come to bears the cost of the transport. Yeah, along the seller bears the cost of the transport and insurance, the risk is on the part of the buyer. Now we come to the D's. At the destination, be careful with poor infrastructure in the same economic zone with the buyer's warehouse. Includes customs clearance or duties, some small urgent matters. Okay, yeah. The table helps us come with the basic questions. Who can get a better price, the buyer or the seller? Who can get better terms, the cargo insurance? Does the buyer require a deadline for the delivery of goods? Does either of the two countries of origin or destination have customs problems? Below you will find an outline of the 11 Incoterms, which clearly show how the scope and risk of each of the parties is carried. Okay, and bear in mind all the colors refer to the seller. Okay, and so when we're looking at it, you see this one, EXWE. Yeah, the most of the weight is on the buyer. And as you move and progress along, more and more of it transfers. And of course, I'm imagining this one is really like Amazon, right? It's like they're basically saying, yeah, we'll do it all. Okay. Well, that's it then. Okay.